I think when we first started talking about including y'all on the podcast, we were going to have conversations about racism and the Black Lives Matter movement, which Ebony brought up. So, like, in regards to recent events, what are your thoughts, opinions, etc.?
Yeah, so I think there's just like this heavy feeling that's weighing on a lot of us right now, especially our BIPOC students. The fact, just the lackluster charge that only one of three officers was presented with yesterday in terms of the Breonna Taylor case. And for me at least, it's just super hard to be on social media, especially Instagram and Twitter, because I follow a lot of activist platforms and I see people protesting. I see people tweeting that Breonna Taylor's drywall got justice before she did. I see people still wanting to sign petitions, still wanting to reach out to the attorney's office. And there's just this helplessness, this feeling of helplessness. Um, Now that that's the charge that he has, what can we do? Um, so yeah, I'm feeling super just like disconnected from the rest of the world, especially as a Black woman myself.
I definitely agree with everything you said, Ebony. I think that I just feel tired. I think I feel tired to a point where I kind of feel nothing. Like I don't know, like it's just every day there's something new, like there's something different and like desolate and depressing and sad. And when you are just like oversaturated with all this hurt and trauma, it for me it gets to a point where like it's like numbing. Like I can't even process it or feel it anymore. And I think that the charge for the result of this Breonna Taylor case has kind of woken me up a bit, like kind of snapped me out of this very like numb phase that I've been in for a while, because sometimes it just gets too much, and now it's just like anger. Like it's just like this intense anger that I don't really know where to channel it. I mean, I can go to a protest, but at the same time, it's scary because a protest is not always a safe space for people. Like there are antagonists who are police, really, who are intentionally trying to break these protests, and so it just feels like there's nowhere to turn.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel that. I heard about the protest that's happening tomorrow in Nubian Square, formerly known as Dudley Square, for people who just like don't know where that is. And I was planning on going, but yeah, I totally agree with you, Jasmine. It feels sort of, I don't know, it doesn't feel like a space that can remain safe and that can remain valued, especially when we have law enforcement that seem to just not care.
Oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. My roommates and I were actually talking about the protest at Nubian Square, and whether or not we should go, what are the risks, what are not the risks, etc. But I'm curious. So, for a lot of people in the United States, the conversation about race has been not as ongoing as it should have been, and was really just brought up during the George Floyd protests. But as Black women, it's been a conversation that you've had to experience and live through your entire lives. What are your thoughts on like the recent events versus like your entire lives being like this?
I mean, I think they're shallow. I mean, it's while I do appreciate people like kind of realizing, I guess, even though I don't understand like what makes you want to realize this now as opposed to the past 400 years, but I do appreciate people wanting to finally engage in these conversations. But at the same time, it's kind of overwhelming to feel like everyone suddenly cares about your life, but then no one actually wants to really do anything about it. Or when it becomes boring, they get tired of talking about it, or they're uninterested. Like this isn't
Hmm.
something you can just jump in, have fun for a little while, and just like tap out because you're done. Like if you're a Black person living in this country, it's not a choice. Like you live with this every day. You can choose not to talk about it, but it doesn't mean it won't affect you. And it's annoying. I would call it annoying, even though there's definitely better words to describe it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't care for the performative allyship at all. Like you will get unfollowed in a second. And that's exactly what was happening this summer. Like I basically cleanse my social media of almost everyone I went to high school with. And it wasn't because I personally like had a vendetta against these people, but most of them were, and I'm going to say it, anti-black. Um, and I went to a high school in East Boston, predominantly Hispanic and Latinx. So there was this overlap between being surrounded by POCs, um, but there was also this disconnect between what it means to be black. It's different to be a person of color and to be a black person of color. Those things are not interchangeable and those experiences are different. So when George Floyd was murdered and then I woke up the next morning and saw the same people who would call my ideas radical in the English discussion, third period, or and I saw the same people posting black screens for Blackout Tuesday, the same people who are in the hallways saying the N word and basically disregarding anything Black Lives Matter before that. I was surprised. I was shocked. I was bamboozled, to say the least. Like, I just didn't know where it was coming from. And I know for a fact that there is a lack of education there. And in saying that, I'm not saying that you can't one day be uneducated about the Black Lives Matter movement and about racial injustice, um, and the next day that you can learn from that. But I will say that if you are in that position, it, whether or not you're a person of color or not, it starts from education, and you can't just wake up one morning and repost what your best friend posted about Breonna Taylor or about Elijah McClain, or about George Floyd. You have to do the research and you have to do the work like the rest of us. Um, and as a Black woman myself, most of that work was inherited and most of that work was learned through experience. But I still get behind the computer every day and look up an article or read a law statute and see how I could make real change in the legal justice system, or in the criminal, as I like to call it, the criminal injustice system, because it's important work to do. So yeah, I don't care for the performative allyship at all.
Mhm. What do you think would be like a constructive way to raise awareness, spread information, or become more informed yourself? So, like for example, like you mentioned, the criminal injustice system. So conversations surrounding criminal justice reform. This, like at least on my social media feed, maybe mine's different, but then there's been discussions on how the law isn't really the best mechanism to create material change. What are your thoughts on that?
Directed at
Um,
Ebony or at me? Oh, go ahead. I'm
Anyone,
sorry.
anyone, honestly, go ahead.
I guess I can, well, I can answer. As a prospective lawyer and as someone who is an intern right now at a law firm, I care very much about the law and I care very much about reforming the law. In saying that, I recognize that the law, just because something is a law, does not make it inherently fair, just, or good in any way. Um, and I think that that's not the only avenue for change. And I'm seeing that on in my friends and on social media when I'm visiting these like social um, change platforms like the ACLU or the NAACP. Um, Getting out, sometimes it can start even in the home, if that makes sense. So, I personally, for me, I have had family members who maybe said things that were anti-black at some point or said things that were quite frankly a quote that I would associate with a conservative Republican, which is it, which may be fine in some contexts for other people, but it wasn't fine for me. So what I did was I started to educate my family members, my cousins, my aunts, my uncles, especially people of older generations, just like telling them that when you can't just rely on media channels and the news to tell you everything about people who look like you, because in doing so you're implying that they're giving you the full story, and it's important to humanize black lives, instead of villainizing them. And I think that's what we see, especially when you're watching the news, which is why, quite frankly, I don't watch it anymore. I like to read my news. I don't watch it at all. It's because a protest can quickly become a riot to them, just like a murder can quickly become death, just regular death by chance. And that's not the case at all. So I started in the home. If you feel like the law is too far from where you are, or you feel like the law is untouchable, then start with the people around you.
I agree with that fully. I think one thing that ties back to what you were saying earlier, Ebony, about performative allyship is that if you really want to be an ally, well, one, being an ally is something that is earned. You can't just name yourself one. But if you really want to earn that title of being an ally, take what you learn and bring it back to people you're close to. Bring it back to your mom, your dad, your uncle, your racist grandma. Bring it back because there's no need for you to just keep this information to yourself because people who are not willing to step out and learn like you are, people who are okay with being bigoted, which might just be your family members, they're not going to take the effort of trying to learn. You did that effort. So we need you to take that back and talk to people who may not be in that sphere yet. I think if you're an ally and you don't try to do that, then you can't really call yourself an ally. So I think it's also on the reverse where you can learn from your family members, but they also need to learn from you. Like that's very important because we need this to spread everywhere. It can't just be educated people talking to each other or people who are empathetic talking to each other. We need to everyone needs to become a part of that circle of of the conversation.